I don't know why I wasted any time questioning otherwise, because of course Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg would be crazy enough to villainize and prosecute the good guy on behalf of the criminal, because Alvin Bragg is openly team criminal, if not by his own philosophy of defelonizing serious crimes, then simply by the results of his tenure. Since Bragg took office in January last year, charges for serious crimes have been downgraded at an elevated rate. And even the conviction rate on these downgraded misdemeanors has declined as well, meaning more criminals back on the streets to continue their criminal habits that are, unsurprisingly, producing increases in crime, creating more scenarios where citizens have to intervene on their own behalf, since the government often refuses to protect them. And so it was surely a foregone conclusion that Alvin Bragg would bring charges against the guy who restrained Jordan Neely, the now infamous Michael Jackson impersonating social justice martyr whose death inspired hundreds to play chicken with the subway in a game they've unfortunately won for the moment. Because there are apparently only two ways to face a harsh prosecutorial crackdown from Alvin Bragg. Number one is to be Donald Trump, but that doesn't apply here. So number two is to do Alvin Bragg's job for him and actually deal with the criminals on the street. And that's what former Marine and now student Daniel Penny did. He confronted Jordan Neely's threat on the subway on May 1st. He restrained Jordan Neely in a chokehold that, by all evidence, unintentionally resulted in Neely's death, and also, by all evidence, it was Neely's aggression that prompted this interaction in the first place. And for that citizen intervention where police do not, Alvin Bragg is now bringing a second-degree manslaughter charge against Daniel Penny. Daniel Penny turned himself in to face arraignment at a New York City courthouse on Friday morning. Now, of course, manslaughter is a different charge from murder. The theory here will not be that Penny intentionally killed Neely. It will be that Penny was reckless in his actions, that he should have known that his actions were likely to result in Neely's death, and that his recklessness constituted a gross deviation from what a reasonable person would do in that situation. The problem for that case, though, is that there were plenty of other reasonable people in this situation, some of whom actually helped Penny apprehend Neely and then put Neely in a recovery position after he had been subdued, and some of whom actually complimented Penny for his efforts. And it's not just that guy saying good job. According to witnesses, nobody in this situation told Penny to stop. In fact, several others expressed hostile statements toward Neely and support for Penny. One older woman says she thanked Penny when the interaction was over. And that's because these people had just witnessed Neely's aggressive behavior immediately prior, and they were glad that someone intervened to stop it. And not just according to Daniel Penny's statement, but according to other witnesses, Neely was yelling on the train, "I'm fed up, I don't mind getting life in prison, I'm ready to die," and he started throwing trash at passengers. That witness, who says she thanked Penny, says that Neely was actually threatening to kill passengers, at least in general, saying, quote, "I would kill a MFer. I don't care, I'll take a bullet," before Penny engaged to stop him. And in the process, at least 5 911 calls were made, describing a homeless man who some found to be threatening in his behavior that, of course, for Jordan Neely was routine for years. Jordan Neely had been arrested 42 times in the last decade or so, and even if you want to argue that most of those were for minor infractions, 3 of those were for outright unprovoked assaults on women. In one case, punching an old woman in the face. In another, attempting to kidnap a 7-year-old girl. So what would a reasonable person have done? Well, it sounds like all the reasonable people were all but clapping for the guy who Alvin Bragg in the state of New York now accused of committing manslaughter, making Alvin Bragg the unreasonable one, actually. But of course, there's no corresponding charge for him recklessly ruining a good man's life. as he's now trying to do. Daniel Penny faces 15 years in prison if convicted, but I have to think, even with a New York City jury, the evidence in this case is solidly in his favor. Still, of course, even with charges dropped later or an acquittal at trial later, that does not relieve Penny of the lost time and the stress and the interruption of his life that he's presently enduring. And the question for the rest of us to consider is, what the hell are you supposed to do? If you're in a situation like this and you call police, at best, it will take them several minutes to arrive, if they even do at all, while the problem continues abusing you and others. And even if police do arrive, and even if they do arrest the threat, odds are that criminal will only be apprehended temporarily and then released, and then right back to commit the same abuses tomorrow. If, however, you handle that threat yourself, well then you'll be prosecuted as the bad guy with likely much harsher treatment than the actual criminal received. When the city refuses or neglects to police these people and then punishes those who police them themselves, well then evil and insanity will operate unimpeded. So would you prefer your abuse by the criminal, or would you prefer your abuse by the state? That is the simple choice. There is no third option where the abuse is appropriately stopped. But there are choices in the methods of abuse, apparently, because at least if you pick criminal abuse, there is some variety in the selection. The trouble is that variety only develops in one direction: escalation, as demonstrated in a similar case in San Francisco this week. Now, as a guy who did my time in the Bay Area for a couple of years a decade ago, I can tell you that the hazard on San Francisco's train system, Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, isn't just the criminals. It's the disease, or at least it was. Back in my day, the seats in the cars were upholstered with a disgusting fabric that had soaked in hobo excrement for decades. And if you take that as some kind of exaggeration, well, tell me this photo is explained by anything other than a bum's ass, or a bum's bum, if you prefer a joke that's much cleaner than these seats are. But the good news is, since my departure, BART has upgraded to less absorbent vinyl seat coverings, which is fantastic because it makes that bodily fluid cleanup so much easier. In this case, blood from a deranged man attacking someone with a meat cleaver. On Wednesday, 24-year-old Charles Johnson was arrested for terrorizing BART passengers with some sort of large butcher knife. Johnson was robbing the backpack of one passenger and slashed him in the back in the process, before menacingly pacing back and forth throughout the train car, cleaver in hand along with him. And not that any place in this route is a welcome spot for this sort of behavior, but this happened in the worst possible place, under the bay, in the 4-mile tube between San Francisco and Oakland, heading eastbound, as in the underwater passage during which there are no stops and from which there is effectively no escape. And so passengers were running through the cars trying to get away from this guy and begging the train operator to please go a little faster. A very frightening scenario, I'm sure, but let's be thankful, because it could have been so much worse. Thank God there was nobody there to subdue Meat Cleaver Man with a chokehold, because that would have been the real tragedy, possibly even racist. And few people do intervene, of course, because California, like New York, would probably punish you if you did. The criminals are the bosses there too. Last year, there were 4 homicides, 7 rapes, 225 robberies, and 114 aggravated assaults, not just in the Bay Area in general, but on board BART trains. Numbers have been elevated since 2019, when there were 499 violent crimes committed throughout the system, meaning more than once a day, someone on the train is seriously victimized. On any given day, at least one person who steps aboard is going to be violently attacked. Now, let's say you're aware of those numbers, and for whatever reason, you have to ride BART, but you'd prefer to fight Cleaver with Cleaver. Well, too damn bad, you can't. No blades over 2.5 inches, at least concealed in San Francisco, a standard that prohibits many common pocket knives. They haven't banned toothpicks yet, though, so you could carry some of those, and maybe if you land one in just the right artery, you might have a chance. And even though a recent Supreme Court decision says otherwise, you can absolutely forget about any additional firepower, too. Recall last summer in the Bruin case, the Supreme Court said that so-called good cause or proper cause or special need requirements for concealed carry permits are unconstitutional. That was decided on New York law, but it applies to invalidate the same practice in many jurisdictions of California too. And San Francisco city government insists it is working hard on its systems to comply with that decision and start issuing those concealed carry permits right away. But you know how that government software is. It takes a long time to update. And so as of January, 6 months after the Supreme Court decision compelled them otherwise, not a single concealed carry permit had actually been issued in San Francisco, though the sheriff and police departments insist they are working on it very hard, which, in fairness, is kind of the response whenever you ask the police about much of anything in that city. Hey, there were criminals attacking me. Could we do something about that? Oh, yeah, we're working on it. Okay, well, if it's going to be a little while, could I carry a weapon to defend against these criminals myself? Oh, yeah, we're working on it. Okay, but it's been kind of a long time, so I actually had to use that weapon in my own defense. Oh, well, in that case, the wait is over, and now they're finally acting with urgency to arrest you. And of course, it's not even the weapon that is the problem in that scenario. As demonstrated in New York, the supposed problem persists even when the weapon is just your bare hands. And that's because the problem isn't the weapon. The problem isn't the violence. The problem isn't even the crime at all. The problem is you, the productive, law-abiding citizen. And when we start to understand what the Alvin Braggs of the world view as the problem, their enforcement actions and their supposed solutions start to make a lot more sense. When the government won't protect people and penalizes people who protect themselves, well, then people with something to protect will exercise the only remaining option that they have. They will leave. And once formerly great cities will crumble without the productive to support them. And then only the criminals who instead steal and abuse and attack will remain. And in that situation, maybe Meat Cleaver Guy isn't actually crazy at all. Maybe he's only a year or two ahead of his time, because when this philosophy is fully realized, you are absolutely going to have to hack your way out. So I'd say go ahead and grab that meat cleaver. It's probably the smart move, actually. Better yet, grab a machete instead, because it's a real jungle out there. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christensen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.